Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be going over the brief geography and history of Grenada. And I say brief because, as you can see, Grenada is very small. Very teeny tiny there on my atlas. So I checked out a book from my library, hoping that it would have a better map. And, sorry for my squeaky chair, first of all. It does have a bigger map, but it really doesn't have any details. So here is Grenada, with no landmarks or details whatsoever. All these islands up here. But, we're gonna work with it. I would draw an island like I did with Nauru, but honestly, I think I can work with this map. I think I can pull it off, so let's do it. So I'm going to point out some geographic locations here on the map, and then we'll go over its history. And then we'll flip through this book. This book's actually not about Grenada. It's about the entire Windward Islands chain. So we'll flip through and just talk about the parts that involve Grenada and read them to you. And I know I like to do a series on each country. I like to devote a few days to each country. Unfortunately, I can't do that with Grenada. This is the only book in my entire library system that talks about Grenada. There are a lot of documentaries and things I could check out about the U.S. invasion, which, yes, the United States did invade Grenada. Wait till we talk about that. But it doesn't really help me much, does it, in this series? But there are no storybooks or anything I could flip through to show you. I usually talk about a language that's spoken in each land, but they primarily speak English, and they do speak a dialect of patois, but if I did that, that would be pretty racist, so we're not doing that. And they don't have any UNESCO World Heritage Sites, so I can't even really do that. So this is going to be the one and only Grenada video. So I'll try to make the most of it, because Grenada is a very interesting place. And again, I know I say that with every country, but Grenada is pretty cool. It's very lovely. First of all, where else are you going to find an island that has a volcano called Kikumjeni? It's true. And not only that, that volcano is underwater. It's located about right around here, and it last erupted around 2000 or in 2001. Grenada actually has many volcanoes. It's a volcanic island, as I believe all the Windward Islands are volcanic. Grenada is therefore very mountainous. All the mountains are volcanoes, whether they're extinct or active, are in the center of the island. All of the rivers flow out from these volcanic mountains, and there's lots of big round lakes in the middle. You can imagine why, them being volcanoes. The longest river being St. John's River, that flows just north of St. George's. A weird naming thing is kind of like we talked about with Australia. Grenada was named by the British, I should say, and they just weren't very imaginative with their names. Pretty much every landmark in Grenada starts with Saint. Like the highest mountain, which is about right here, is called Mount St. Catherine. It is, of course, a volcano, and it is technically an alive volcano. There's a difference between an active volcano and an alive volcano. An active volcano is one that, is eruptible and can erupt, at any time. But an alive volcano is one that, is churning and all that good stuff, but is not likely to erupt. It's predicted that the last time, like the earliest possible time Mount St. Catherine could have erupted would have been around 2 million years ago. and it is highly unlikely it will ever erupt ever again. So yeah, it is an alive volcano, but not active. So there really is no threat of Grenada, exploding, being covered in lava, anything like that. Grenada also has many, many islands around it. The largest island being Carriacou, which is, you can see right here. And the next one being Petite Martinique, which is right there. And there are lots and lots of little islands in between here and all around there. But they are either uninhabited or very sparsely inhabited, or they're privately owned, so they're not much to talk about. Carriacou is the main important one. Let's see, what else? Of course, it's in the Caribbean. It's very tropical, very, very beautiful, lovely, lovely beaches. One thing I like to do when I do these country videos, especially if it's a country that I haven't really seen a lot of pictures from. So like I didn't do this for like Australia, but I did it for like Nauru and Myanmar and Sri Lanka. I would go on YouTube and look up tourist videos and see what people visiting the country wanted to film. And the videos out of Grenada are just lovely. Like the beaches there are so pretty. And of course they're Caribbean beaches, so they look heavenly, but they look really different from other Caribbean beaches. And I was really trying to decide, like, what is it about these beaches that look so different? Because, like, look at this picture, like, that's what you see when you think Caribbean beaches, but they don't really look like it. And I kind of realized that there's something very Californian about the beaches on Grenada, but I still can't quite put my finger on it. Like, they even have a black sand beach, but it doesn't look like a traditional black sand beach. It looks like if LA had a black sand beach, It's a very cool little island. Very interesting. So, how did it get to be that way? How did it get to be so, hip and fun and interesting, but still incredibly Caribbean, Shall we find out? Here we go. The name Grenada, I always thought it was Grenada, like for my whole life. Since in Spain there's a place called Grenada. And indeed, when the Spanish came, they called it Grenada, but it is pronounced Grenada. And actually the island went by quite a few names. The very early people that lived there, I believe, called it Cameronia. I hope I'm saying that right, but yeah, it's gone through quite a few names, but let's go through its history and discover the names that it's gone through. So the earliest people, lived there quite a long time ago, but the earliest established villages weren't built until around 300 CE. So people lived there, like 1000 BCE, so on and so forth, but people didn't really settle down there until late in human history. Population slowly rose in these islands and came to a head around 1250, but then petered off after that, and no one knows why. It's either due to drought or there could have possibly been an invasion on the island, but we'll never know. There's no way of us knowing. There is a beach with really cool art on the rocks. It's really pretty, but not much is really known about it, but it is neat. So in 1498, Columbus sailed by and spotted the island, and he named it La Concepcion and sailed on back to Spain. He didn't land on it. He just sailed on back to Spain and, told everyone that he had seen this island and named it La Concepcion, and that's what people called it. Amerigo Vespucci spotted it, also did not land on it, but he named it Mayo. And so in 1499, he put it on a map, calling it Mayo. So maybe it was May when he sailed by and wasn't feeling very imaginative, I don't know. But he was literally the only person who called it that. It was not called that literally anywhere else on any other map ever. And once maps started being made of the Caribbean about the 1520s, the Spanish decided to just call it Grenada, after Grenada in Spain. For whatever reason, I didn't really dig deep into who could have named it or what map it first appeared on. That, probably something interesting to research, actually. I should have looked into that. That literally didn't cross my mind until just now about why it was named Grenada. All I knew was that it was named Grenada. But anyway, it was listed as Grenada. So no one ever actually landed on this island until 1609, when the Spanish arrived on their island of Grenada to build a settlement, and they were promptly chased off, and the settlement was canceled, and they gave up. What a bummer. But then the French came in 1649, and they did build a settlement. And they got along with the inhabitants on the island at first. There was peace for a few years, but then that soured, and they did have conflict and fought, and the French came out on top. And, there was conflict for many, many years between the French and the original inhabitants of the island. And in the 1700s, the original islanders were completely gone from the island, either dying during the French conflict, or, from disease, or, from ways that people die from Europeans coming over. But a lot of them actually fled to other islands, to where they were being treated a lot more fairly by the Europeans. But yeah, it was purely a French island. And since it was already called Grenada on all the maps, the French called it La Grenade. So there's another name for you. And they established the town here, and they called it Fort Royal. And you can't really see on this map, but there's a huge natural bay right here. And this was perfect for hurricane protection for their large ships. So whenever there's a hurricane on the horizon, they could dock here, because it was just a really perfect, natural, safe harbor for their large ships to protect themselves from the hurricanes. This was all well and good until the British came along and captured the island in 1762 during the 7 Years' War. Now, an aside about the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was one of those wars. First of all, an aside to the aside, Britain and France historically don't get along, like, ever. Like, from, like, literally, like 1 CE until, like, World War I. So for, like, 1,000 years, Britain and France don't get along, right? Almost 2,000 years, basically. Yeah, let's say, like, 2,000 years, they don't get along. Any excuse for a conflict, they took it. So England, up in their colonies, wanted more space, and who owned the space? The French. So that was an excuse for them to poke at France and try to create conflict. Meanwhile, in Europe, which was a mess, like, of course it was in the 1700s, and that's a whole other bag of worms to get into. We're not even going to touch that with the 10-foot pole. Since Britain and France were being petty and picking fights at each other, one side was like, oh, you're gonna, try to take my land? Well, I'm gonna side with the Habsburgs in this land dispute. And the other side was, oh, you're gonna side with the Habsburgs? Well, I'm gonna side with the Prussians, their enemies. Oh, well, then I'm gonna side with Russia. And it was just like, they just didn't like each other, ever. And they were just constantly one-upping each other. That was the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was just them just trying to, like, top each other. Like, just trying to, like, come out on top. Like, I don't know how to describe it. So the British took Grenada, or La Grenade at the time, not for any economic benefit or any reason other than they just wanted to stick it to France. That's why they took the island. Literally the only reason. I mean, France was also taking their colonies in East Asia and in the Caribbean and the Americas, and so Britain was taking theirs. It was all very, very petty. So that's why Britain took over Grenada. So the next year, 763, once it was all over, and they were doling out, who gets to keep what in their little petty fights, they gave the island to Britain. And this is when it was officially named Grenada, because, a British stiff upper lip sees this written down and says Grenada instead of Grenada. So that's why it's called Grenada, because it's the snotty British pronunciation of Grenada. I can say that as a person of British descent. It's not offensive, I promise. Anyway, guess what happens next? Speaking of being petty, the American Revolution happens, and while Britain is distracted, France swoops in and takes the island back, because it literally never ends between Britain and France, I swear. It's just so petty. So France takes the island back in 1779. 1783 is the Treaty of Versailles. That's when, they sit down again and divide up who gets to take what after the American Revolution, and France decides to give Grenada back to Britain, which some of the islanders weren't happy about, and there was actually a revolt in 1795, but the British squashed that pretty quickly. So, spice plantations are built, and you're going to need people to work those plantations. So what does Britain do? They kidnap people in Africa and force them across the ocean and to work as slaves, So that happens, but the slave trade is outlawed in 1807 and is officially banned a few decades after that. So, of course it was terrible, but in this case it could have been a lot worse. Thankfully it ended as early or as soon as it did, once it was taken under British control. It could have been a lot worse. However, it was owned by Britain, and Britain did own India, so they started sending Indian people over to work in the plantations in 1857, and today there is still a large Indian population in Grenada to this day. In 1843, a ship sailed by from Asia going toward Britain and landed in St. George's, which is named after King George III, by the way, who wasn't a saint. He wasn't St. George. Anyway, everything starts with a saint. It's named after a saint, but this isn't named after St. George, but anyway. And it's not St. George, it's St. George's, but a ship came by from Asia to the island carrying a bunch of nutmeg trees, and they thought, we should plant some of these on the island because they'd probably really take off, and they most certainly did. And to this day, Grenada is the second largest grower of nutmeg in the world, the first being Indonesia. Considering how large Indonesia is with their massive population, and Grenada, remember, that's Grenada. I have the camera zoomed in too, so it's very teeny tiny. The second largest importer of nutmeg in the world. And they also grow plenty of other spices too. They say that if you walk around, you can just smell the spices in the air. It sounds wonderful. So the nutmeg industry is still booming to this day. In fact, they have nutmeg on their flag. It's that big of an industry in Grenada. Eventually, Grenada was made a crown colony, and in 1917, they started getting some political rights. They formed the Representative Government Association, slowly but surely started giving Grenadians like the right to vote, the right to form political parties, to form unions, so on and so forth. And in 1951, they had their first election. The winning party was the Grenada United Labour Party, which had started off as a trade union that evolved into a labor party. And they gained popularity after leading a strike for better working conditions for the plantation workers, which actually had turned into like a huge fiery protest, but was very successful. Their leader was named Eric Gary, and he was a very beloved figure at the time on the island. And when they gained independence on February 7th, 1974, he was elected their first prime minister. Grenada retained their status in the Commonwealth. So the British Commonwealth, like in my Australian video, means they're still technically a part of Great Britain. The Commonwealth is like an aspect of Great Britain, but they're still an independent country. It's really a weird little program. So the Queen has a special position called the Governor General, where she doesn't actually have a position in the government. She is just called that. She has no power whatsoever in Grenada. But they're still technically on paper considered part of Great Britain, but they are not. They are their own country. It's really weird, but you know, they have like the Commonwealth Games, or they have like their own little Olympics, and every once in a while someone from the royal family comes by on a royal visit, and that's pretty much like what the Commonwealth is anyway. It was all well and good at first, until re-elections came about. Eric Gary was re-elected for a second term, but it was very suspicious. His rival party believed that it was a fraudulent election, and that his what's it called? Like his posse, his gang, he had formed a I always forget the word. His militia, that's the word. How did I forget that word? Called the Mongoose Gang, to go around and make sure that people were loyal to him. It was a little sus. And they believed that, they were going around making sure that people were voting for Eric Gary at the polls. He insisted that they weren't, but it was pretty much his word against all the evidence to the contrary. So while Eric Gary was on a trip to the United States on March 17th, 1979, there was a bloodless coup. And they came in, destroyed the Constitution, completely threw out everything about the government, and established the People's Revolutionary Government. And their leader was named Maurice Bishop. And he's important because the airport is named after him. You always look at a country, whoever the airport's named after, they're important. You know it. Only the most important people in the country get airports named after them. So, Maurice Bishop. He had really close ties to Cuba and Castro in Cuba, and also with other communist bloc countries. And he was determined to make Grenada a socialist country, like a totally socialist country, but vowed to make it like a non-aligned country. Like he wasn't going to form alliances with other communist countries or even other democratic countries. They were just going to do their own thing out in the ocean and be a socialist country. People were fine with Gary being exiled and his possible road to a totalitarian regime being nipped in the bud before it could become something. And Maurice Bishop was pretty beloved. He was a pretty chill guy, considering that he overthrew a government. Very sadly, on October 16th, 1983, there was a coup against Bishop, led by a very, very strict military Marxist regime. Sadly, this wasn't a bloodless coup. It was a very bloody coup. It was extremely terrifying, lasted quite a few days, and it resulted in Bishop's murder. Although they never found his body, but that's a whole other story. Not even going to go there. They established a new government, very pro-Marxist, very militant. They issued like a total like lockdown of the entire island. Like if you go outside, you will be shot, so on and so forth. It was not a good time on the island. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Ronald Reagan was paying very close attention to what was happening because Reagan was extremely, extremely anti-communist. And the last thing he wanted was to have a second Cuba in the Caribbean. And he was very concerned, for one thing, that Grenada was building a huge airstrip in St. George's, which Bishop was really big on getting tourism in Grenada. He wanted tourism to be the #1 industry and have that be the biggest moneymaker for the island. So he said that's what it was, but Reagan was pretty convinced that it was a landing strip for like Soviet fighters to come and bomb America. His other concern was that there were some American students on the island, medical students, that could, potentially be taken hostage if anything happened. And then number 3, something happened. There was a huge government overthrow. The leader was murdered. It was a bad time on the island. So he pulled the trigger in more ways than one and sent a huge invasion force down to the island. And in 4 days, the United States military completely removed the military government and put things back to normal. It's a very American thing to do. Just decide to completely interfere with the country. Weirdly enough, this is like the one time in world history where America decided to interfere and invade a country, and it turned out like, okay. Like the people of Grenada were extremely thankful and like painted like graffiti on the walls like, "Thank you, US, you saved us." And even though like the UN and the EU and lots of other countries condemned this because on paper it sounds terrifying that like a major first world power can just invade whatever country they want because they disagree with the politics and remove that government just because, that sounds horrific. But in this case, it worked out and everyone lived happily ever after. So everyone just kind of dropped it. The UN put in some, motions to restrict the US and then ended up vetoing it because everything worked out. It's like literally the one time that everyone just, went home happy. Everything just was fine. Literally, like, I think pretty much the only time in US history that happens. But democratic elections were held in 1984, and I went through the political history of Grenada after that, and it was all super, super boring. And if that's the case, that means that it's all normal and fine. Because if it's not interesting, that means things are going as they should be. The elections are going fine and people are being elected and debating and so on and so forth, and the process is working, going normally. Great for them, honestly. Perfect. The only hiccup in recent Grenadian history was Hurricane Ivan in 2004, which damaged 90% of homes on the island, which is very sad. There's still some damage on the island today that hasn't been repaired. But that is where Grenada is now. It's just a nice little history of an island. That's pretty much it. I told you it was a brief history. So let me zoom out a bit. Might wobble. It's always harder to zoom out on this than zoom in. Oh, there we go. Okay, are you good? It's good. Okay, and let's flip through. So this book is on all the Windward Islands. And it's actually really nice. And we're actually going to go to St. Lucia in a few weeks. So I might just check this book out again because it has some really nice facts about all the islands in here. So we'll see. That Pleasant Beach. So I should have put some post-its on here. So here we have the Grand Tank Forest Reserve. So here's some of the natural rainforests up in the mountains in Grenada. Let's see. Open up that page. Oh, here we go. It says, you can't really see, but at the southernmost point of the island chain is Grenada, nicknamed the Spice Island of the Caribbean because it produces many different spices for the rest of the world. We'll do this. Life on Grenada is easygoing and casual. Visitors often stay there at night while exploring the Grenadines during the daytime. The island is developing steadily, and residents hope to make it as big a tourist attraction as St. Lucia. Unlike the other islands, which all have above-ground volcanic vents, Grenada has an underwater volcano that can be seen only from the air. Do you remember what it's called? Jenny. I couldn't figure out why. I found the Kickham part, which was that, it has a kick when it erupts, but I couldn't find the Jenny part. Alright, I had to adjust my angle because the cat came and sat on my lap, but back to the video. Here we have a picture. It says workers harvest cocoa beans on a plantation in Grenada, 1934. The island remained a British possession until 1974, which we already knew. Let's see what else we can find about Grenada in this book. Let's see. Here we go. Can you see? Yeah. On Grenada, relations between the Caribs and the French, who arrived in 1650, were initially fairly cordial. In fact, the Caribs invited the French to settle on the island in exchange for trade goods, such as metal axes and knives, mirrors, and alcohol. Within 4 years, however, the Caribs had changed their minds about the presence of the French, and a struggle for control of the island broke out. Grenada's Caribs called on neighboring tribes from St. Vincent and Dominica for support. French settlers from Martinique arrived to join the fight in support of their countrymen. In the end, the Amerindians' bows and arrows were no match for the Europeans' firearms. Those Caribs who escaped fled north to Dominica or St. Vincent, but many were killed in battle or jumped off cliffs to their deaths in front of the advancing French. In 1762, it was the French who were routed on Grenada by the British. At the time, the two nations were engaged in a wide-ranging struggle known as the 7 Years' War. In 1763, at the war's conclusion, France ceded the island to its rival. But less than 2 decades later, while England was occupied in North America fighting the American Revolution, France took the island back. The French ruled from 1779 until 1783, when they returned Grenada to the British. More troubles came for the British in 1795 and 1796, when they had to fight to put down a native uprising. My chair's so squeaky. Let's see. Oh, here comes trouble on Grenada. It says a U.S. military helicopter patrols over Grenada in November 1983. I forgot to say the dates for the U.S. invasion, but it'll say in here. They'll say it for me. October 25th, 1983. There you go. Trouble on Grenada. Less than a decade after becoming independent, Grenada was the scene of a military coup and an American-led invasion. The trouble began on October 19th, 1983, when a coup of communist Grenadian army officers, led by Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Coard, seized control of the government. A few days later, the officers murdered and deposed Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. In Washington, the administration of President Ronald Reagan, a staunch anti-communist, watched the developments on Grenada with concern. Technical advisors from Fidel Castro's Cuba were known to be in Grenada, and the administration did not want to take the chance that Grenada would join Cuba as the second communist anti-American nation in the Caribbean. In addition, some 1,000 Americans are living on the island, most of them students at St. George's School of Medicine. The administration expressed concern for the safety of these American citizens. In addition, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Grenada's British Governor General Sir Paul Scoon formally appealed to the United States to intervene. On the morning of October 25th, just 6 days after the coup, 1,200 soldiers, including U.S. Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEAL commandos, and troops from other Caribbean nations, invaded Grenada. Within a few days, the invasion force had swelled to 7,000 soldiers. The Grenadian army and several hundred Cubans fighting with them were quickly overwhelmed. 19 Americans died in the brief war. Sorry, my chair's really squeaky now. And 119 were wounded. Casualties for the Grenadians stood at 45 dead and 337 injured. 59 Cubans were killed and 25 wounded. The coup leaders were ultimately captured, and all the American medical students returned home unharmed. Free elections were held on Grenada the following year. Oh, I forgot to say they did, hold trials for everyone involved in the coup, and, there were, sentences and prison. Man, my chair's so squeaky. Prison sentences and all of that. Grenada. Cocoa beans dry in the sun at historic Dougalston Spice Estate near Guayave, Grenada. Very cool. Look at this guy. Checking out the beans. Let's see. Grenada. Yeah, I might have to check this out again. Oh, here we go. Here's St. George's Market Square. Very, very fun. Oh, I bet it's so fun to shop there. My poor chair. Okay. I have to stop leaning back in my chair to make it squeak. Okay. Grenada's economy depends on an entirely different product, spices. The tropical breezes carry the rich aroma of spices throughout the island. Grenada is second only to Indonesia in the production and exportation of nutmeg. The spice is even represented on the country's national flag. Since it was first introduced to the island in 1863, nutmeg has played a large part in the economy. It is made from the fruit of 60-foot-tall evergreen trees, which also produce the spice mace. Along with these spices, Grenada produces cinnamon, cloves, allspice, pimento, ginger, bay leaves, and vanilla. Like the other Windward Islands, however, Grenada is also seeking to improve its tourism industry. Let's see. Here we go, Grenada. Here we go. This is Canute Caliste, a painter from Grenada. He's showing off a picture in front of his studio in Carriacou. His paintings have been shown in galleries in Grenada, London, and New York. Nice. Let's see. The Grenadians. Some goats. A farmer looks after his animals in Grenada. The history of the island's name reveals much about the history of the island itself. The first inhabitants called it Camarogna. Columbus arrived and named it Concepcion. Later it was called Mayo. Upon settling the island, the Spaniards named it Grenada after the region in their homeland, and then the French translated this to La Grenade. When the British finally made the island a permanent settlement, they called it Grenada, the name by which the island continues to be known today. The people of this island appear to be more interested in politics than are the citizens of other Windward Islands. It is a favorite topic of conversation, and Grenadians are known for quizzing tourists about world politics and economics. Yikes. Gosh. Okay. English is the main language, but a French patois has been more commonly spoken in recent years, and a sprinkling of Spanish words have entered the Grenadians' vocabulary. The Spanish additions are the result of Grenadians leaving the island to work in nearby Spanish-speaking countries like Cuba or Costa Rica, and then returning with their newly learned foreign words. Grenadians celebrate a carnival in August, and it includes 3 days of dancing in the streets of St. George's, with parades, singing, and steel bands. There's also a sailing regatta in August, Independence Day in February, and Extempo, a performance where singers ad-lib on stage in November. Very cool. I know I say that all the time, but it is very cool. Let's see. Martinique, St. Lucia, St. George's, Grenada. My pencil. The capital of Grenada, St. George's, is a working port where cruise ships, cargo vessels, and yachts pull in and depart on a regular basis. Named after King George III, it is considered the loveliest harbor town in the entire Caribbean. Aww. Factories, churches, and sloping hillsides stacked with red-roofed homes glow at sunsets against the surrounding lush greenery. St. George's is divided into 2 sections, Carriacou, the inner harbor, and the Esplanade, facing out to the Caribbean Sea. The 2 are linked by the 300-foot Sendal Tunnel built at the end of the 19th century. The Carriacou, the heart of the city, is home to the Grenada National Museum, which includes our rock petroglyphs and the marble bathtub that once belonged to the French Empress Josephine, who was born on Martinique. And here you can see St. George's. Very pretty. Almost looks like a European town. Like the Riviera or something. Or like not Greece, but like, I don't know. Anyway. Not Greece at all. What am I thinking? I don't know. Anyway. Several forts and churches galore can be found in the Carriacou. In the Esplanade, or Baytown as it is sometimes called, are old warehouses, the fish market and main food market, an art gallery, and the original Fort George. Several miles south of St. George's is the island's most popular beach, Grand Anse, where people enjoy several miles of white, soft sand and a row of hotels. Then we have Carriacou and Petite Martinique. Carriacou and Petite Martinique, the only other 2 inhabited islands in the territory, are located about 15 miles north of Grenada. Carriacou, with an area of about 13 square miles, is home to about 6,000 people. The people of the island are known for building boats and unfortunately for smuggling food and manufactured goods from cargo ships. Hillsborough is the only village on the small island, and it contains a mere 2-street. Petite Martinique, about 3 miles east of Carriacou, is even smaller. About 500 people live there, and they too specialize in building small boats. There's also a group of smugglers in Carriacou. Or Petite Martinique, maybe they meant to say, I don't know. See, oh, I think that's it. Oh, here you can see the flag with the little nutmeg on it. Yeah, I think that's it. Alright then. My cat's getting irritated at me. He wants to cuddle. It's late at night. I think he wants to go to sleep. So, I will leave you there. Thank you so much for watching. Tomorrow we're going to go to a new country, a completely different island. And I have a really exciting series planned for you. A whole week of videos, I promise. It's going to be great. I cannot wait to get started on it. But thank you so much for spending the night with me here in the Caribbean. I really enjoyed reading and learning about this island. And, yeah, please subscribe for more. Like I said, we're going to go to St. Lucia in a few weeks, so we're going to come back to the Windward Islands. So please subscribe so that you won't miss it. And thanks again. Have have a great night.